Protests against the nationwide lockdown are ramping up across the USA. Angry crowds gathered outside state capitals from Ohio to Kentucky. President Trump is encouraging the protests, tweeting, "Liberate Virginia, liberate Michigan, liberate Minnesota."
How's it going, man?
But it's going pretty well. I mean, all things considered.
All things considered, indeed.
Yeah. I just had a Sunday afternoon nap, actually. That's I think what Sundays are for.
Yeah, that's nice. Little siesta.
Yeah, exactly. Falling asleep in front of a television show you've already seen, it's the best way to make it work for sure.
It really is. I'm the king of falling asleep in front of the TV. It's like a habit that I actually try to get out of doing because I do it so frequently.
I think it's actually, there are times where I believe that without it, I wouldn't be able to fall asleep. And so I need to kind of wean myself off of that, but I let myself have it today. So anyway, here we are.
Are you like a white noise guy? Like when you sleep, do you like having a drone or some kind of a?
No, well, I was about to say, other than the soothing sound of Jamie, the keyboard player from the New Deal's snoring beside me, but I don't think I think he could say the same thing about me now. But no, it's more. I think it's more just about finding a way to shut off your mind to fall asleep. I need it once I'm done, once I'm in it, but to get started.
Yeah. Well, dude, just to kind of preempt everything, I have to say, like, anyone that I've done this podcast with thus far, I make a point to tell them how grateful I am to come on because most of these people, to be frank, I have no business interviewing. Like I haven't climbed any sort of ladder to get to a point of being able to interview any of these people. And yet I suppose it's a sign of the times, people are very accessible right now. And they're just bored and they want to talk to somebody.
Sure.
So, that's really worked in my favor, but regardless of that, like you are the guy for me. I mean, truly, like I need you to understand. I have to fanboy out here for just a moment here and then I'll go into adult mode. But man, like the New Deal, number one, and Dan Kurtz, the bass player, specifically were so monumental in my development as a musician, as a creative person, as a music fan. Like, I mean, it occupied a big portion of my brain for, like a decade of this obsession with, how are they getting this sound? How are they so, like seamlessly, able to kind of pass improvisational information between each other? And you guys, and I still don't believe there's been any other band that does it with the level that you guys do it. I mean, great other bands.
Wow.
And I don't believe that anybody does it in that same way that you guys do.
Holy shit. Well, I better be eloquent for this interview then.
No. This podcast is the opposite of eloquent. Please do not be eloquent.
Yeah. Sunday afternoon, right after a nap. Perfect. Yeah, I think you got me at my most natural, perhaps. That's funny because it's not funny. It's really cool actually to hear that. I think one of the things that everybody's got their version of either I would say for me heroes, right? They're like and I thought originally that. So my story would be that I met Paul McCartney one time, who was the guy who, when I was a kid and I was just playing violin and that I learned everything about every Beatles song on the violin. I'd learn the bass lines and I'd play the melodies and I'd learn the string parts and whatever else. And so when I met this guy 30, 40, 35 years later or something, I was so shocked to like meet a guy who was so enthusiastic to talk to somebody about how enthusiastic they were about his music.
Right.
And I thought, holy shit, like this has got to have happened like a billion times to this man. He's one of the most recognizable people in the world. He gets stopped everywhere he goes, and yet he's and I marveled at his accessibility. And I mean, once you got through the phalanx of security people and whatever else to keep Paul McCartney quite comfortably chill in his environment or whatever. But when you were saying just now that, you know, people who I've had made an impression on you, how surprising it is, how accessible they are. I think for Paul McCartney, the experience is, wow, I can't believe that something that I do so naturally, or gives me so much pleasure, gives other people so much pleasure too. It actually validates, continues to validate, continues to warrant, in his case, like making music. And so I guess what the point I'm trying to make is that I think you would be surprised to think or to know that most people who do something that they do principally just for themselves, how grateful they are that other people are like it too. And for me, the New Deal doesn't exist without people listening to it. It's something that, you know, when we started playing again in this context with Davide, the drummer, that really woke up or reawoke the capacity that I had and Jamie had. Now we've been playing together for like 35 years, 35, almost 35 years. Yeah. That I was reminded of this part of me that had kind of been asleep for a few years. And without the enthusiasm or interest of people in the New Deal, or of fans of the New Deal coming out to see us, I wouldn't have the opportunity to be that guy. And actually, without having that facet in my life, I'm not quite sure I'm the person I'd like to be. And so I'm pretty, I love talking about the New Deal, and I love when people are enthusiastic about it. And I've stopped being surprised when people say like, oh man, it had like a huge influence on the music that we make now. Or I'm not saying it's a regular occurrence, but I understand. I think the value of the New Deal for some people, and in your experience, I might not be speaking about it specifically, but I think for bass players that I've met, young bands that I've met, not so young bands that I've met anymore, I think we just, in some cases, have showed people how to do what they want to do in music. Like we are, in a way, the epitome of do whatever you want in music, you know. And I think in that case, that's the best feeling actually of all, is for me, is to know that, whatever we have done has also kind of grown into, will kind of live beyond us in other forms, in other people.
Yeah.
So I like to hear it.
Yeah, well, that's cool, man. Like I said before, this is in a weird way kind of tripping me out in this thing, and you know, it's funny because I'm not nearly the hungry like bass player, the hungry musician that I was, say, you know, 5 to 15 years ago. You know, things in life sometimes evolve, and
yeah.
You know, now like
neither am I, by the way. You know.
Right.
But I think it's an evolution, right? And I think it's also, I mean, another thing I've said pretty often is like, I've tried many times to get away from playing music. Like the lows are just as low as, are just as big as the highs. You know what I mean? And
Yep.
and sometimes, you know, decreasing the amplitude of the wave of the experience of being somebody who's kind of devoted to music. So, yeah, I think actually is maybe the compromise there, but getting away from it entirely, I think, would probably be is foolish and impossible for me, and likely for you too. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
you can't really another example I'll give is one of the things that I've had time to do now, or I've had no excuse not to do, is to I'm actually looking at my violin case that's sitting on a drawer over here. And I've had that violin since I was 12, and I used to play it really seriously. And I was like, well, you have no reason whatsoever to not take this thing out and play it. You've got all the time in the world. I've got a saxophone downstairs, the same thing with that. And it blows my mind how readily those instruments are in my hands. I haven't played the violin in 10 years or something, but it's like some other part of me is just awoken again. That guy who was that guy, it'll always be with you in one form or another. I used to be really enthusiastic about playing it all the time, but I get a certain, another sliver of myself is kind of reawoken again when I open up that violin. I'll never play it in public again. I don't care, but it's nice to be in there, and it feels good to play it.
What do you suppose it depends on, in terms of, because I totally hear you in terms of reawakening something. For me, it's I'm a photographer now, and I suppose that kind of checks the box to some degree, although I will say straight away, it does not check the box the way that playing and performing music does. Those apex, those climactic moments of playing music. I don't know that I personally have encountered something that is as satisfactory, is as hedonistic, I guess, as those peak music moments. I mean, they feel so good, and so photography I don't think quite gets me there, but I found that it was easier to make some money doing it. Right. And music, I mean, they're both difficult for sure, but music is hard, man.
Music is hard. It's not, it's hard to make it. Well, maybe by way of another example, I played in a long time in a band with my now ex-wife that was a pretty popular pop band. And
Dragonette?
There was, and so at the beginning, it was something that was, it met every intention that I had for it, which was I wanted to do something with this woman I was in love with musically, because she was a great musician, and also it was a kind of pop, it was an activity that I'd never done, which was to write a pop song and produce it the most poppy thing ever, even though I'd grown up in mostly listening to pop music. And so when it met both of those intentions, it was so satisfying on its own that I think it kind of it resonated a lot. I mean, it resonated a lot enough for us to get a record deal and et cetera, et cetera. And then there was, in a way, that was kind of the beginning of the end of of those goals being met, because the minute it became about satisfying a record company, the schedule of a record company, having to be self-conscious about the music that we had just been writing, in a way for ourselves, and now having to either have some continuity from song to song or just be intentional about it in a way that we didn't have to be before. It began began to kind of erode in such a way that when I look back now and I saw a video of a performance we did, I don't know, maybe 10 years after the inception of that band, it had a lot of great success, and it had met these other requirements that started kind of coming in, which were to make some money, or to make a lot of money, or to kind of better the record that we had done before, etc. Even though we met all those things, that by the end of it, when I was standing behind a keyboard or two keyboards and hitting play on Ableton, and there's no bass guitar in sight anymore, and I'm just mostly playing the hits or whatever. Mm-hmm. When I was watching that video, I was like, holy shit, how far it wandered away from what I had gotten into it for. And that can be applied to pretty much anybody's experience in music, and probably and is the danger for most people in the business of music, that it becomes the business of music as opposed to the music that you wanted to do and play and whatever, Yeah. And so when the New Deal started touring again, I just decided that I was not ever going to give a shit about how much money we made, whether we made any Like if I paid money to play in the New Deal, I didn't care, because I didn't want to risk corrupting this one thing in my life that has been now for 20 years, has been something that for the most part has been exclusively about playing exactly what I want, or what's exactly right for this little trio in which I am, completely trust everybody else who I'm playing with, particularly Jamie, who we've played together with, since I was a kid. And that is the most fucking rare thing ever in music, is to be feeling like, have the capacity to feel that in the moment, that present in the moment with purpose and with that level of communication, which now we definitely have at Davide too. That's why it's working so well.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm only going to stick at that intention. Like, yes, it would be good to make lots of money playing in the New Deal, but I'd rather, if that were to compromise any bit of what I want out of it, I'd do it for free.
Yeah. Well, that's cool to hear, man. And I totally understand the sentiment as well, because, again, to go back to what I was saying before, that sort of hedonistic aspect of just entering into that moment. And, it's not like, I think when people that are not musicians hear, musicians talk about that sort of thing, I think they assume that, oh, that must just happen from start to finish every time you're like up on stage or every time you're jamming something. And
totally.
You're right. And it doesn't happen that, I mean, like for me personally, I remember that most of the time I was just, especially like an improvisation, I always felt like I was just kind of waiting. I was like, all right, what the hell are we doing here? And it felt like a lot of that. But those moments where you got to that place where you were just, in this little cocoon or something, just being, coddled by this music is just, it's just hard. I can't even like describe it. And it was like, I was always trying to get to those sort of New Deal moments, that pocket that was just so epically tight where, whatever, like the keyboard player's playing right on the 7 or something like that. And you're in that most funky possible thing. And just everything, and it was like, obviously we got to those moments far, far less times than you got. And it's like trained ourselves to do that. So I can only imagine if you're anything like me that, you must, I mean, I don't know, what is that like for you?
Oh man, it's fucking amazing. It like never gets old. I'm reminded of a picture that somebody took of us at the end of a show that we were playing in Toronto in probably 2002. And I have my arms in the air like Dick Nixon or whatever, just like so elated that we're saying thanks to the crowd at the end of the show or whatever. And and I remember exactly how I felt at that moment. And it was and it is, I mean, again, maybe I'm just a little more, the highs are not as high and the lows aren't as low anymore. So maybe I don't have my fists in the air, but it's rare that doesn't happen like 10 times a show right now with the New Deal. And that's, I mean, I would go so far as to say like I became a junkie very quickly again to that feeling, like that started again when we were playing. And the great thing is now that so what I would say is it at the moment, and hopefully when I say at the moment, I mean now that we're playing again with Davide, and presuming we're going to be doing that again as soon as possible.
The chapter, let's call it.
Yeah, at the moment, the feeling is so frequent that I could take it for granted, and instead I make a point of listening to most of the shows that we have played, because now we're multi-track recording them all and putting them up, or we're often making albums from them, as we have 2 or 3 in the last couple of months. And I make myself listen to them at times too, just because maybe I remember something in there that maybe we should put out on a record or do something with or whatever else. But I've been listening to the New Deal a lot now to just remind myself of things that even though I've heard them 10 times, like, you know, the last record that we put out, I've listened to it a lot in part because I edited part of it with Jamie. And I get the same feeling listening to it like it happened the first time. Like I've heard it, I don't know how many times. And it reminds me of like how magical in the moment it was when we seemed to just land on this thing. And it really is landing on this thing. Like you could never intentionally set out to go and play a set like we did. Like, you know, first we'll start in this minor key for a bit, and then we'll go and move over to here. And maybe at the, you know, the 7-minute, 32-second mark, we'll dive into something unexpected that Davide's going to do. And then, you know, but yet we're effectively doing that without any communication in terms of what's coming next or what the intention is. It's like an intuition between us. And when I think of how crazy that is, in a way that can happen so fluidly and so consistently, it's like I have to check myself and go back and listen to it again and again. And at the moment, it's kind of saving me in a way, because it's keeping this thing that I have told all of my friends. I'm like, the only thing that sucks about coronavirus for me is that I can't play with the new deal. It's it was the thing that like literally woke me into an amazing place over the last few months. And it just happens to have, you know, coincided just at the time that we canceled like 23 shows or something like that. I had a whole summer planned of showing. Sucks. And but it is a feeling that is I feel really fucking lucky is what I feel like when I play that music. And I can confirm it because I've done this so many times. Like I'm playing a bass line and I'm like, okay, this, you know, after 3 minutes or whatever, this 2-bar phrase that I just came up with, now I have somehow micro edited it as I'm looping it. And I know that every length of note and intention of every attack and whatever just feels right. And it's not that I've done it, you know, intentionally, like fix this note and then that one or whatever. But then all of a sudden I'm playing this line and I think, man, I should really remember this for another show. This is such a great bass line. And the minute I do that, it literally falls out of my hands. I can't, you know, codify it, try to remember it, make it intentional at all. And so I end up thinking like, well, I'm the lucky guy to be the conduit of this idea that just happens to be, it's like my contribution is a third of this idea that has manifested itself in these 3 guys. I think Keith Richards at one point said he's like an antenna who just picks things up from the air. And I more or less begin to feel like that's what happens with me and it's only really in the new deal with Jamie. I don't play with other people that way. And I wouldn't want to. I actually wouldn't have any confidence that I'd be good at it. It's just in this context. It's right. It's just that but sort it's a great feeling. That's a very long answer to that.
Yeah. No, that's great. So I mean, do you think that the reason, I mean, how much of your connection with Jamie and sort of like what you just described, that sort of comfort and that ability to sort of just read each other very quickly, that's kind of my own translation of what you said.
Yeah,
I think probably fair.
Accurate. Yeah.
How much of that is just you guys playing together for so much? And this is kind of where I'm basically saying, hey, feel free to like brag. Like this is a moment where it's okay to do this. How much of it is just like, dude, I am really, really good at hearing things and coming up with something fast. Like how much of it is like each one?
Well, I'd say both. And I would say that I'm better and faster at it now than as a result of having done it for 20 years. And like, for example, I imagine that if Jamie played the same set of chords 4 times in a row, I could probably write 4 different bass lines underneath it that would be very different from each other. Then and in a way be very would change the mood of those chords, like would recontextualize them. And that's, I think, in a way, my job in the New Deal is to, there's a lot of things you could describe it as. Like I'm the bridge between the drums and the keyboards, and I'm the consistent, like a looping, repetitive thing that people can latch onto while Jamie's freaking out. And and I think probably my role is all those roles, but there is certainly, there's a particular understanding that Jamie and I have together that I think is, and it's not simply just musically that we played together. We, as time goes on, it's actually funny. Today's his 50th birthday, and I sent him a, virtual birthday card today.
Happy birthday, Jamie.
Later. Yeah. And I just told him how thankful I was for our friendship and for this really extraordinary time that we've created for each other, and this extraordinary experience that is, and my relationship with him gets better and better every year. Like I admire him a lot as a musician and as a person and as a friend, and not just to me, but to other people. And I think that the music our working together musically has deepened our friendship, and I think our friendship has deepened our ability to play like that together. I think in terms of being able to anticipate what he's going to do next or what I'm going to do next, it's not ever like, I'm often surprised by what comes out of Jamie's hands, but it's more like delighted, surprised, and like, fuck, I can't believe I've never heard him make a bad decision or one that I wouldn't agree with, or
right.
And so that's a personality thing as much as it is a musical thing. Like the New Deal does go, on massive left turns and right turns out of nowhere, but it's a good 90-degree like fucking jump from where we were a second ago. Like, and I trust that what you're doing is right, even though it has nothing to do with where we were 3 seconds ago. And I'm not sure that that would be possible or as easy with somebody I didn't know so well or didn't have that kind of relationship with. It's kind of like, if you jump off a bridge, I'll go with you, musically.
Yeah. It does seem like, and I know, I mean, I've had conversations with people about this since like early 2000s, that, you guys always seemed like the band that was attempting to play the same song, whether you knew it or not. And so I have to assume that, do you guys like the same music? I mean, is it sort of like if somebody has one of those, I don't know, some random song from like 1982 that's like, riding the coattails off of Thriller, and it just has that super funky, bass thing, and you just kind of discover it one day, and you're like, oh my God, like, what is this? Like, this is amazing. Like, is he liable to kind of be like, oh my God, it's the best, we should cover this, or,
Well, it would be like, I would discover something like that, holy shit, I've never heard this before. And my mind would be actually, oh, I got to send this to Jamie because this is a great song. And we do that all the time. And his answer would be like, oh yeah, man, I heard this when it came out. I've actually, the B-side of that record is really much better. And it was produced by this guy who also, was involved in the Manson murders or whatever, like just,
right.
He's got a very encyclopedic, knowledge and memory about music. We definitely have a very broad, where our musical tastes intersect, that it's a pretty broad space. We kind of grew up listening to funny records together. Like, I think and maybe a better way of saying this is the music that we find bad or like contrived or silly or whatever, like kind of joke records, like Rupert Holmes, the guy who did the Pina Colada song, that if you like making love at midnight, that's on an album that has like 9 delightful songs on it, all of which are just absurd. Like the lyrics are absurd and the key changes are like over the top. He's a fantastic writer, but I think he was trying to be like Steely Dan, but his lyrics are even worse. And we listened to that record together every time we got stoned in his parents' car all the time through high school. And it is like, it's so much part of a lexicon between he and I that like, it's almost part of a secret language, I suppose, and that it's turned into like an inside joke all the time. So the music that we find silly or cheesy or that maybe other people wouldn't pay attention to, we have that in common. We like finding that. It's almost like we like the shitty music as much as we like the great music together. But Jamie goes far off into, he asked me to play sax on something that I guess I'm going to do tomorrow that I think is probably going to sound like a Steve Reich piece, like a modern concrete composer, and music for 18 musicians or something, I think was the reference. I was thinking like, man, I would never start, like I wouldn't go down to my studio and be like, I'm going to make something that sounds like Steve Reich. And Jamie probably is going to do it very, with a lot of acknowledgement and understanding of Steve Reich. Not just like, oh, I'm going to make something that sounds like modern and abstract and concrete and weird, you know? So we also, like, I think Jamie tips far into some areas that I don't go into. And I grew up I didn't grow up in, I was born in Brazil, and my parents' music came here to Canada with me. And I have an affinity for some Brazilian records that I think goes over the head of most of my friends. Like but they're kind of like, you know, it's the equivalent of like eating your favorite meal that your grandmother used to make. Like that is the most kind of comforting and familiar music to me. But we don't spend a lot of time listening to Brazilian music together. But we do have a lot in common.
You ever try to kind of persuade him and you say, well, listen, we're going to listen to some Brazilian music, you know, before the show today, and tomorrow, you know, we can listen to the most avant-garde shit that Jamie can possibly come up with?
Nah. I think because most of Jamie's actually the backstage DJ before we play, and I mean, I think probably we won't have even finished like all the classic rock B-sides and more obscure classic rock artists by the time it's time for us to retire. We won't be leaving the genre. Which is
dude, I have to say that in a weird way, you're saying that, and it's kind of like reinforcing this odd thought that I've had listening to you guys before, which is that you've had some moments of almost like I don't even know what you call it. It's like I can almost tell that there's this interest in like yacht rock or like you know, anthem-y like dad rock stuff, because there are times in which I can hear you kind of pulling from something, and I'm like, are they, you know, they're sort of, you know, heading into that sort of, I don't know, like that silly 80s like chord progression and like and way of doing things.
Yeah, totally. There's I think I got like a gold star from Jamie when we were playing at the end, and I do it pretty much every time now. I think it's the end of our song Gone, 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 where kind of riffing out on this, just like whatever, hammering out the riff at the end just before we finish it. And I realized that I could play the chords from that song, What You Gonna Do When I'm Gone? What you gonna do when I'm gone? What you gonna do? And I just started kind of cueing it, and Jamie looked over me like, and like burst into laughter. Like he knew that it was just like a reference that nobody else would know, or maybe some people would, but like only he and I would know why it was like so appropriate to stick that in a New Deal song. Like it just, and I'm laughing now thinking about it, and I realize it's just maybe a completely absurd inside joke, but it is from that kind of dad rock world that, you know, and the yacht rock genre is clearly something that's not just internal to the New Deal. I mean, that's, I think the existence of the Omega Moose started with a mutual.
I was gonna say, that like clearly that
Loggins and Messina, whatever, and but I'll tell you that I think that in part, it actually, our affinity for, like, for example, my affinity for 80s pop music, which is basically what got to be expressed in Dragonette
Mm-hmm.
is that not only was it like the first exposure that I had as a kid to, you know, music basically other than the Beatles, but there was some really inventive shit going on in that time, like dance music or pop music that was involving like rudimentary synths and drum machines and whatever else. It was like making a lot with nothing, or making a lot with very little, like very basic sounds, and musicians like discovering as they went these instruments that they probably all of them pulled together to buy one synthesizer and then had to make the most out of it. And the inventiveness production wise, and also kind of and the creativity melody wise and lyric wise, and still continues to like astound me. I think it was the 80s, it's 70s for rock and 80s for pop are still for me the only, like when I want to go listen for inventiveness, I go back there, you know.
Yeah.
And I think in part we intuitively knew a lot of those sounds, and the kind of chord progressions, and that often are, you know, the chord progressions that I believe were the best ever in setting people up to be able to sing good vocals and good melodies are like 80s pop music is great for that. And the New Deal relies on those very same things. Like it's chords that that inform a way that I'm going to play a bass line, that is going to in turn inform the way that the melody that Jamie's going to play over top of it. And we're drawing mostly from, I think, 70s and 80s music, and then overlaying, let's say, the kind of the beats from dance music that most of the time house music is borrowing from pop, or like the kind of more intellectual side of pop in terms of chord progressions anyway. And it's so it's with, and that kind of intelligence in pop writing or whatever can exist in great songs and in shitty songs, and I think we rely on it and we respect it one way or another.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Dude, it's very cool to hear you say this, because you're sort of validating this like odd theory that I like had but couldn't quite explain to people for a very long time, like this idea of like, you know, the New Deal is sort of oddly 80s and they're sort of oddly rock, and then it's like on the surface you'd say, what the hell are you talking about? Like they're a beep boop improv jam band, like that. They're not that at all, you know. And I'm like, no, there's something out there. And the other thing that I always noticed that you guys do, and I think I have a feeling a lot of this comes from you, is that sort of like rushing the one thing that a lot of 80s songs kind of do.
Right. Yeah.
There's like a lot of stabs that occur, like the half beat just prior to the
beat.
one.
Yeah.
And you guys have is that what you call it?
Yeah. When you're pushing, if in that case, you're saying to push the one, but you could be pushing the two, pushing the 3, 4, whatever. And that actually is, I mean, if I weren't allowed to push a note, I would be playing, like I basically would be playing tuba in a marching band, but just on bass, you know. And I think that happens. That's in a lot of genres, but but I'll say this: when we were growing up, we were like classic rock was what everybody in our high school was listening to, and then the cool girls I met were all listening to like Depeche Mode and David Bowie and whatever else. I went to an all boys school. All the boys were like listening to Zeppelin,
right?
A lot of Zeppelin, I recall, you know, and so there was never, but basically the pop music or the popular music that we were listening to was very much classic rock from almost our parents' age moving forward. Like the first band that I played in with Jamie, we played like Janis Joplin and Elton John, Led Zeppelin and Boston, and would never have thought for a moment to play like any music from an 80s pop band or an electronic pop band, like whatever, as I said, Depeche Mode or New Order, and or David Bowie for that matter.
Right.
And yet it was all around us. And at the same time, we were playing in jazz bands that were, and me on different instruments. So I was playing sax in a jazz band and playing bass in the rock bands with Jamie, and Jamie was playing, and Jamie actually was playing everything from, like he was the musical director one year we did the musical Anything Goes. And I remember Jamie's they're like rehearsing all the singers for months and months and months. And he's playing like very, like whatever, I don't know, is it Cole Porter? But just like 1920s style, kind of stompy jazz. And then like very more classically informed piano. And then we'd go home and like do a 4-track recording of a Pink Floyd song with his Juno 106 or whatever. And, and what we actually found together was like, you know, you open the door into like Stevie Wonder, and then Stevie Wonder, like you start hearing about things like funk music, and then we started like discovering funky and then funk music. And so we ended up having these kind of a pool of, as I said, like very like rich in composition and intelligence, popular music to listen to. And then this really edgy shit that we were starting, like edgy, it wasn't edgy, it was like Herbie Hancock in the sense that it hadn't just come out, but it was still like, what the fuck is this?
Right.
And again, fast forward however many years, that's kind of what we're doing with the New Deal, is like playing like what I'd like to think, like, what would Herbie Hancock do here? Or what would, like, I was actually singing a bass line of one of Stevie Wonder's tracks to a friend of mine yesterday, going like, listen to this, a thing that Stevie Wonder is doing. It's a line that I have tried to play so many times on my bass, but he played on a mini Moog, you know.
What song was that?
It's from Boogie on Reggae Woman.
Okay.
If you listen, the whole thing is a bass solo. And actually the reason why I mentioned it was because we were listening to my friend. He's good at asking these kinds of questions. He's like, what do you think the most important song that Michael Jackson ever did was? Just out of the blue. And I'm like, I think it's Don't Stop Till You Get Enough.
I love this. I love this debate.
Yeah.
I debate that for days.
Well, that's true. And I'm sure my answer should have been, the one that I like the most, the one that really jumped out at me when I heard it the first time, was Don't Stop Till You Get Enough. And so we put it on to listen to it. I was like, oh my God, do you hear that tiny little turn on that synth bass? That's a quote from Stevie Wonder, and it's from Boogie on Reggae Woman. And I thought just in the moment, I was like, that's how influential Stevie Wonder was, that I know that bass line, there's just a little riff that's played on, you know, a synth bass and Don't Stop Till You Get Enough, has to have come from that player having learned the entire Boogie on Reggae Woman synth part, because I don't think anybody would have ever heard something like that before when it first came out. And
it's
so
very possible.
The first time, it was like, and it is definitely like that song has Stevie Wonder playing on a synth keyboard that has influenced how I play bass guitar in the New Deal, and comes from that. And I discovered that song when I was probably 17, but I never had occasion to even think about quoting it or riffing it until I was 35. Like it was just like a seed that was there, you know? But so those seeds once planted, I think die hard is what I mean. And basically, if Jamie and I had never listened to any music past 1990, we'd probably still be playing just the way we are.
Well, man, I mean, you know, when you're talking Stevie Wonder and Michael Jackson, as you're getting into sort of learning about funk music, I mean, as a bass player, I always felt like those are two of the top like 5 in terms of just like, you know, like you hear the stuff that they're doing, and it's like the spacing and the freedom, the ability to just go anywhere with it. And on the note of MJ, you know, there are certain songs where like the way that the bass you know, works in a lot of those songs, it feels very seamless. And I think the average person listening to a Michael Jackson song in which the bass is actually highly innovative, they don't really even know that it's innovative, because it ties into the melody so like perfectly that it camouflages the bass line. You don't even really know that it's there. And then one day you really sit down and you listen to like PYT, where all of a sudden it's just boom, 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 boom.
Yeah.
Boom, 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 boom. And just that by itself, you're like, what the hell is this? But under as the backdrop of everything else, you're just like, oh my God. It's like you're doing the most quirky thing. You're not doing anything that is obvious to where you just pick up a bass line. Okay, what if you only heard the melody and say, what's the bass line going to be? Like, you would never choose that. Maybe you would.
Yeah.
Maybe you would.
I think those are the best. I think those are the best bass lines. Like, they are, they're doing their job, which is to support. Like, I spend any time that I do anything in music now outside of New Deal is I'm producing other people's records, or in some ways not even records. Like, just I've got a couple of like some people who I think will be really good in what they do musically. They just they don't quite know how to get there yet. Like, and I can just tell them a few things that I've learned, like give you a couple of short, or like, if you just follow this one simple rule, you'll get to where you need to get to. And the simple rule is always be in service to the melody. That's it. The vocal melodies are all pop songs, right? And I mean, you have to presume, of course, the melody itself is good enough to be serviced that way.
Right.
But when everything falls in line with that intention, then you have a shot of making a great pop song. And but that doesn't mean like everything has to be quieter than the vocal melody, or it has to be like less interesting, or it has to whatever. It's being in service to it. And bass lines that are in service to vocal melodies are I think you described it really well. Like, it's almost like it's not there, it's camouflaged, but when you actually stop and listen to how well the bass line, how innovative the bass line is, that it's almost invented itself right out of your consciousness. And I can think of a song like, the Beatles are amazing with that, but the one that just sticks to my mind is that song 8 Days a Week, the Beatles song.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The bass line is like a walking jazz bass line, but without it, the melody would be boring as fuck. He's basically playing the melody. Doom, 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 doom.
Yeah.
And it's just, and ooh, I need your love. They couldn't exist without the other. Like, the bass line would have no purpose without a vocal melody, and the vocal melody would like fall flat. It would be boring as fuck without the bass line. And that's 1965, in terms of the evolution of pop music. Since then, we've gone much farther than that. And but it is, I think, for example, and now that we're just on the subject of great bass players and great melodies, Sting to this day just blows my mind about how he writes these bass lines that I could never play and sing the lines that he's singing at the same time. Yet they're integral to each other. Like, because he's the creator, and his songs are the thing, like, we love the songs that he's making. And in his mind, the bass line and the melody go together. Like, and they're all great melodies on their own, great bass lines on their own, but together they're the song. And there are very few other instruments that can kind of own that space in the way that the bass can.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, don't you find that it's kind of fun to be sort of that glue that kind of keeps everything together? It's a very, and maybe this is somewhat dependent on like someone's personality as well, and why maybe bass might be appealing to you. But it does seem as though the bass is always that thing that's sort of like, okay, you're here. Well, I'm going to find sort of the common place, and I'm going to
the diplomat, the negotiator.
Yeah, like that. Totally.
Yeah, that's interesting. Well, I definitely I shy away from conflict, so maybe that's why I got into playing bass. But it is. I think it's a funny. Okay, well, the reason I got into playing bass is because and then this is yet another like Beatles story, is like, well, there's a guitar player already, there's a drummer, there's a keyboard player. We definitely don't need a violinist, and you can play your sax, sure, but what we need is a bass player.
Yeah.
So can you learn bass over the weekend? And so it's not, what? Sorry, 1 second. So, sorry. In part, I didn't choose the bass player because it was the negotiator, diplomat instrument in the band. It was the one that I needed to be able to play with my new friends.
Right.
But it is I find it a funny choice to have made after playing two exclusively kind of solo instruments. Like the violin, sure, is orchestral, but it's, you know, meant to, it's its own thing. There's nothing more boring than playing bass on its own. But violin on its own, or sax on its own is, and it required and bass requires a discipline that is not, like if you told a violin player or a sax player that what you're going to do with this instrument is you're going to come up with a 1 or 2 bar phrase, and you're going to play that for 5 minutes over and over again, you know, like, it would just wouldn't sit right with the kind of person that's, you know, been pursuing what there is on what that instrument has to offer, like the violin or the sax.
Right. I made this $1 million Stradivarius so that you could just sit in the pocket for 20 minutes.
Yeah, totally. And so in a way it's a funny choice, but on the other hand, it is, I mean, I love the role of bass guitar in, you know, in a traditional sense, or, and of course, mostly in the New Deal sense. Like I do recognize that, I consider my job to be a supporting job in the New Deal. Like the supporting in the sense, like, you know, Jamie, you come up with crazy stuff and I'll glue you to the drummer, and then, you know, and I'll come in, I'll fill that space in there. And the opportunity that playing this instrument in the New Deal offers for me, it's not even the opportunity, it's actually a demand. It's like, you can't just stay playing that 2 bar thing and feel like your job is done. Like you have to somehow imply, you know, the increase in tension or the deceleration, or like to create dynamic and drama. And so go and find some tools that let you do that without corrupting your job number 1, which is play the bass well, and doing its job of mostly playing that 1 or 2 bar loop all the time. Find other ways to make that exciting, which is all of a sudden opened up this world of pedals and trying to find different sounds. And there's, you know, there's certainly like dramatic differences from one sound to another, but the bass in the New Deal doesn't operate on those extremes. Like they take, you know, if I'm going to put like crazy distortion on the bass, it'll only be for a little bit of time, like a crazy long reverb or something like that. And so in fact, it's about nuance and subtlety. And I discovered basically last year that one of the most effective things I can do is play nothing at all, or play less. And again, that's counterintuitive, I think, for some players, but I really like I think I've gotten to know my job well in the New Deal. It's not like somebody handed me a job description and said, this is what you do to be the bass player in this band. I've written the job myself, but it's been with, you know, an accumulation of unarticulated information that is in fact informing what I'm supposed to do. And I don't think there's any other instrument that I could do that with, like including if I just played synth bass. I don't think I'd be able to do it. Play the exact same notes in the same register. It wouldn't be the same as what the bass guitar does in the New Deal.
Well, you don't have the finger, which is the ultimate game changer. You know what I mean? It's not
exactly.
You're not just manipulating like, you know, 0 to 127 and that's it. It's far more, you know, greater range when you've got a little pad and maybe a little fingernail and just something else.
Oh man, I have to keep. I've listened to a couple of records where I'm like, or live shows where I'm like, man, I got to cut my fingernails. I can hear it all over the record or all over the recording. Although the irony is, of course, that due to some of the genres that we play in, I spend a lot of time trying to emulate the one thing that synths make really easy to do, which is you can define the envelope of a song, of a note. And so, which are really cool sounds, like kind of punchy, big, like, I mean, I'm about to draw the envelope with my finger, but I think you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And so I actually end up, using my hand to muffle all the strings and just playing with this one thumb that gets the, like, it's like punchy, muted bass notes that I'm trying to copy the synthesizer that doesn't have the same kind of nuance as fingers do. I just find it ironic.
Dude, it's funny. I know exactly what you're talking about right now. And I noticed that this is a little bit of a recent development for you. Correct me if I'm wrong, because I noticed that you're doing a lot more thumb playing. I was at the Philly show.
Okay.
Which was, God, it seems like forever ago now, but it was only February, I think, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Was it? When
maybe it was January. I thought it was February. It could have been a year ago. That's what it feels like. That
is ultimately, I think, the only thing that can be said about it. It feels like forever ago. It feels like another world away. It really does. And
BC, before Corona,
Yeah. BC 2.
Yeah.
BC 19. Yeah. But yeah, it's a new evolution, certainly, in my playing. And in part, it's from, I was playing bass on a bunch of records in my studio for some of these people have been working with. And I realized how, like, when you record bass on a pop song, every note counts, quite literally. I mean, I'll go through and play the same bass part like 18 times and just like, and then pick notes from different takes or whatever, because they, there's a ton of variety in just how you play one single note, even with the same intention. And so I actually spent a lot of time playing with my thumb like that, on just to be like kind of a big, fat, round, warm, patty bass sound that, and not much was being asked of me in terms of the numbers of notes to play or whatever. It was just like do the job of the bass for this record and just make it like consistent, supporting, and like not in the way. And I really liked the sound of it. But I'd had a lot of time. I had to focus on it and pay attention to it in a way that, which is very, very different than playing in the New Deal. You don't have time to reflect back, listen to a take, whatever, wonder if there's another way to do it. You're just fucking doing it now. But in terms of the intention of like the, I think it was in a completely unadorned setting where it's a bass guitar plugged directly into a mixing board or whatever. I'm not distracted by anything else. Whereas with the New Deal, it's like, what sound am I going to use in the patch, and what is Jamie playing, and what's Davide playing? And it gave me an opportunity to listen to like the purity of that kind of performance of a note. I've actually never even thought about it this way, but I know this is true. And so with that, once you have that kind of awareness and that knowledge, it's like I can't forget it. And so bringing that into the New Deal, I knew that it was how I liked to play bass now, and what would it sound like if I put it on all these, through these effects. And it turns out that it sounds pretty close to a, mini Moog synth if you needed to, or an 808. And it comes with, in a way, like the kind of welcome compromise that is, you can't play as many notes. Like, instead of ripping with two fingers or whatever, I've just got this guy that I've got to, and I can't up swipe it either. Like, I have to reset the finger every time I'm playing it. Maybe I kind of get that sound with another one.
To get that same attack, you mean? To get the identical attack. Yeah.
And so you got to pick better notes in the right place. And that's a different way of playing, as opposed to like shredding more, faster, more notes, whatever. We went through a period of that in the New Deal, and I remember saying, we're playing too fast and we're playing too much, and we never do that anymore. And it's great.
On that note, was there ever a time, because I remember, and like, I know I'm getting like so specific, there's probably people listening that are just like, dude, what the hell are you even talking about now? But I can't help myself, and I'm just going to do it anyway. So,
sure.
you know, like I remember there were recordings that I would listen to where I was like, there's no way he's actually playing that quick, right? And so and maybe I'm wrong, but there were times where I thought, like, is it possible that he's just putting this like single note delay thing, and he's just going like,
Yeah.
just hitting
Exactly.
once,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. So you're playing that, but and it becomes daga. But to play that note such that it sounds like that is, it's the most mechanical thing, like the most mechanical thing I do, I think, because again, you're playing a note that's got to be, you're actually playing two. It's got to be, because it's going to fill the space of two. It better be really good.
Stop.
The one that you're playing to get, you got to end it in time so that it gets repeated in the right time, with space between it. And if you fuck it up, you're going to hear two of them, not just one. And so like, it's really quite intentional. And that's, but then again, that's 80s dance music. That's
right. Yeah.
From that, that's the, what's that song? Every time I see you falling, I get down on my knees and pray. That has that great bass line that goes, and that basically, like, I played that one time in the New Deal. I was like, oh, cool. I'm gonna keep doing that. That's great. I don't have to work as hard. I just hit the delay pedal.
Right. Yeah, man, your your effects thing is, I would imagine, for people that maybe have kind of seen the New Deal like once, or they sort of know of Dan Kurtz, I would imagine that the pedals are probably the first thing that most people are just like, man, he did some really crazy sounding shit. And, that like, and I think, like one of the big like aha moments that I personally remember having, as a bass player was, it was like, and I feel like you were the first guy, at least in that sort of, jam bandy subgenre of music, went like, it seemed that you were the first guy to do this, and people sort of, I think maybe all the other bass players were just like, well, and like came over to Dan's house and was like, wait, okay, whoa, what was that? And I remember like for a long time, I was trying to figure out what the hell it was. And like, eventually it was like, oh, octave pedal, relatively high up on the fretboard, Moger Foger with the filter thing. And it was like, I mean, you were like the godfather of that. And I remember that was like one of the first things where I was like, Jesus, like that is the closest thing to that Daft Punk bass tone that I can get to, you know what I mean? And it was like, and man, it was like years I was trying to figure out how to do that.
It was such a, like a delicious discovery. I'm sure everybody has this experience of, there are times where you have like a eureka moment in your mind, and in my case, they've been, I mean, maybe you have more of them, but the only ones that you remember are the ones that are actually transformative. But so I had one a couple of years ago that created some great opportunities. In this case, I realized that I could turn my whole house into a recording studio, because I just built this house and I put Ethernet cables into every room, and I realized, oh, there's this new audio protocol that we've been using with the Dragonette and the New Deal for a long time. Like I can use my home internet, my home Ethernet, and I could have 8 recording studios in here. And I actually did that. I turned my house into a bit of a wacky, fun house of recording for lots of other people for about a year. And that was one of those moments where I was like, I woke up in bed, I was like, I can do this. And it was just a thing out of thin air. The only reason I mention it is because I remember doing that with the octave pedal and the Mooger Fooger pedal, and being like, oh my God, I can't believe this is true. Like I can make this sound. And then of course, the great thing about that was I'd never run my bass through an effect pedal ever before then, ever. And I don't even remember what I was doing before that year. I was playing bass in like shitty cover bands, and you'd never have an effects pedal for that. And it also opened up like so what else can you do with this, right? Like if you can make your bass kind of unrecognizable as a sound, like what else is there? So there was, all of a sudden I had like a Digitech whammy wah pedal that like could pitch bend the bass. And then I had a guy actually build some things for me, like to like do channel switching and stuff like that, or to adapt a wah pedal to do something else. And then the idea of like delay on a bass, or like, and at the time, every one of these kind of ideas was like, find $300 somehow to go and buy a pedal to see if it'll work or whatever. And then it got out of hand. I mean, at one point, I think I had like 27 pedals, and the bass sounded like shit just by virtue of running through all of those
right,
terrible
just
little preamps and whatever that
snarl. Noise floor is all the way up.
Yeah.
You're not even playing anything.
Yeah, totally. Or just like if you turn everything off and you listen to the bass that came out through all of these like bypass pedals, it was like the smallest, thinnest, like least dynamic sounding instrument ever, that it basically lost like 10% of its sound every pedal that it ran through.
Right.
Which is actually why I switched it to for a while I was running it through Ableton and had a whole bunch of MIDI controllers and stuff like that, and that was awful. And now I think I've actually got a great setup with I have an iPad doing a lot of the work for it, just because in the iPad you can have 25 pedals all patched, but there's no sound degradation from one pedal to the next. And and now I really enjoy like the inventiveness of it all, and the hack of some things. Like I'm hacking some software to make it work, and how I get all of my pedal controllers into it and whatever. And that's the other part of it's the same spirit of inventiveness in terms of how we play together musically that inspires like, what can you do now with the sound of the bass? But again, most of it is just, so actually to your point, because iPads, and we learned this the hard way with the computer, that they're not invincible, and sometimes they crash, and when they do, there's like no signal that's passing through it. So I have a safety chain before I go through all of my the electronics, and the safety chain is an octave pedal first. Like I go into an octave pedal and then into like my safety channel, that if everything fucks up with the iPad, I've still got my octaver first, just going down a single chain, and then from that DI back into the rest of the pedals, because I can live without a filter for a while, but I can't live without the octaver. And at the octaver, basically doing that thummy, pumpy stuff that in a way you don't really need the filter for anyway. But without it, I'd feel naked.
Yeah.
Basically.
Yeah. Were you, where were you at when you sort of discovered that, like, oh my God, this octave kind of high up on the fretboard thing is just the shit. Like, it sounds so great. Like, were you already like a touring band, or was this like long before that? Or
this was coincidental with, it's a great question, actually. I never thought of it. It was coincidental with that kind of 1 or 2 month period where the idea of the New Deal, unbeknownst to us, was born by a confluence of a couple of things. And so it was probably, I had played my bass through an octaver twice before the gig that we went to do that became the recording of This Is Live. And it was just and to be honest, I don't even remember if I had that filter. I don't think I had the Moger Foger filter then. I just had an octaver. And the reason I had the octaver was because somebody had left an octave pedal in my house. They were a guitar player in 1986. And I had just had it with me ever since. Like, well, someday I'll need this thing. So whatever, 14 years later, I was like, what happens if I run my bass through this brown octave pedal? And
right.
And the New Deal was born.
Right.
But it did come because the intention of playing, like, people would call us like a jamtronic band, and like we were all about like dance, like playing house music and dance music. But if you listen to the first This Is Live record of the New Deal, it's not like that at all. It's literally like guys kind of figuring out in real time, like, what can we play together? And it's kind of more like dubby, and and slower tempos and sinister and so I had an octave pedal at that time, but I wasn't yet looking to be recreating the sound and the feel of like the electronic music that I had been listening to. I don't think even at that time I thought of incorporating stuff like the early 90s house that I was dancing to in Montreal and university into this band. But I knew that that's the sound I wanted to be able to play like that. There was no context in which to do that. But yet somehow the octave pedal both like was essential to playing bass in the New Deal from day one, even though it wasn't serving the purpose that it had that a year or two later it certainly was doing, which was that with the octave pedal or the filter pedal together, making this kind of pumping sub synthy bass sound.
Yeah.
And you're right. I think a lot of bass players in the scene really took to that sound. It's in every bass rig that I see.
How can you not? I mean, it is like the funniest, like what, $90, thing that is such a game changer. It's so, and also not even remotely saying that all you need to do is get an octave pedal. Clearly that's not what I'm saying, but it's really funny how like, for me as well, like just going into the Guitar Center and just like, I'm going to try this thing out. And it's funny too, because like below a certain note, it just kind of sounds like garbage, and then once you get up to a certain point, that's when you're just like, oh, like what do we have here?
Yeah. Well, I know exactly what you're talking about, getting to the lowest note. I found, however, so I have I think it's called an OC2 is the original octave pedal that was like an analog pedal. And actually I talked to a guy recently who explained to me how it works. It's pretty impressive. But then again, this was before New Deal Mark III kicked up. I was in the music store, I don't know what the last time was that I like looked in a rack, like the glass rack of guitar pedals at the guitarist part of, Long McQuaid in Toronto.
Mm-hmm.
And I looked at this octave pedal because the, characteristic brown pedal that I looked at so often, I was like, wow, that one looks a little different than the one that I had. I was like, wow, OC3, there's like a new version. And I rented it. And I think actually my rental just ended now. I've had it for like 3 years. I've been paying $6 a month for it. And I've already bashed one of the knobs off it, but that is a digital version of the same algorithm or whatever with a couple of extra features. And I have discovered that it can take the louder input or the heavier output of my alembic bass, which has a monsterly loud output if you wanted to. And also it can reproduce a couple notes further down at the bottom end of the scale. So you get like 3 more semitones, which sometimes is really cool.
Yeah.
So I still get to be delighted by octave pedals, however many years later, or evolutions in octave pedals. And Ryan Stasek from Humphreys McGee introduced me to this guy who's, I think his company's called 3 Leaf Audio, this guy Spencer. I ended up buying 2 of his pedals after talking to him on the phone about bass pedals for like 2.5 hours. And I was like, we were both super nerding out, and there's nuance between octave pedals too. And so this octaver of his is better at doing some things, and it's actually a replica. It's an intentional like duplication of the OC2, that original Boss pedal, but they have slight differences. And I find that one is better for some things than the other, but most people would never know. It just sounds like a low bass note. But then me here.
Yeah. So. Well, when you apparently we're exposing for the nice, beautiful main atmosphere behind me. The webcam
look at that.
Just suddenly decided that it didn't want to see my face anymore. Yeah, you can see. Here's my little atmosphere now.
Oh my God,
Isn't that beautiful?
That is amazing. Is it? I guess your climate's about the same as ours where I am here. You guys are like,
I suppose
on the ocean, right?
It's cold.
It's like, yeah.
It's probably. Are you a? I can never tell with the Canadians that are almost in America, Canada, if they're Fahrenheit or if they're Celsius.
Oh, we're Celsius, but we understand Fahrenheit. I'll give you just so that we can. Here's my Can you see out there? What do you
Oh yeah, you are in the country, huh?
You see like a little country road and a barn.
Very cool. Very cool.
Yeah. This is although I'm like an hour outside of Toronto, this is my other best childhood friends, family farm. And I've been lucky enough to be able to hole up here at his former grandparents or his late grandparents' house. And so I'm here most of the time. But yes, for our temperature here today is 8 degrees Celsius. Which would be, I guess, what is that, like 45, 50,
Okay.
46 degrees Fahrenheit.
Okay, that's about what it is here as well. Little ocean breeze. But yeah, it's I would consider it cold for this time of year. I think back in Philly, it's been kind of in like the low 60s for the most part, and then up here it's like in the 30s and 40s, like still every day.
Yeah, I must say I'm tiring of it a little bit, but it'll come soon. Yeah, and I come up to this place pretty much every weekend that I'm not touring, so this becomes, I have a vegetable garden up here, which I really like to plant, and I'm looking forward to starting my grow lights with some seedlings soon and get ready for, Farmer Dan this summer, which is, I think,
Nice.
pretty much what I'm going to do full time. But yeah, I really can't wait for the summer to hit this place. At the moment, it's still more indoors here, which again gives me opportunity to play my sax and my violin. No one has to hear it, so it does have its upside.
Yeah. So was the plan to just get out? I mean, I assume, do you live in the city like most of the time?
Yeah. And I live in a spot that is like, my place is a nice place to be too. I had so I've got these 2 recording studios in my house, and as I said, and the whole thing is in theory wired to record throughout it. And for about 2 years, I was like, the new deal when we started playing with Davide, we would be jamming in what was my dining room that had been set up as like a live room that was connected down to the control room downstairs. And that would happen 1 day a week, and the rest of the week there would be all these emerging young artists from Toronto and surroundings coming and recording at the studio. And what that evolved into is I had rented my house to Red Bull, who were they were supposed to be there still for March and April. They were going to do a 2-month kind of documentary about the creative process around this artist, an urban artist in Toronto. Who was bringing
that's cool.
Lots of guests from around the world to come and record at the house. And so, yeah, it's cool. And they got the call from Red Bull headquarters in Austria or whatever, and we're like, shut down all of your projects, get everybody out of there or whatever. And so my house is not my home right now, in that it's full of all of the kind of set decoration furniture that they had for it's my house, but it doesn't feel like it.
You're right.
Because it's, whatever, it just looks like the way they wanted it to look like. So I'm actually much more comfortable here than in my own home. Red Bull's going to come back in a few months, and I'm just going to kind of leave it like that.
That's so weird, man.
It is weird. Even my studio is like, and the irony is that I managed to get them a bunch of really cool gear. And so there's like some of the world's best microphones and wicked speakers down in my studio, and but they're not my speakers, and they don't sound like the way my studio does. And so I even feel like a guest in my own studio. So yeah, it's funny. It looks like they literally like ran away from a carbon monoxide burst or something in the house. Like they just left one day. They'll be back, but in the meantime, I'm up here.
Yeah, until you head back to your house in Chernobyl, Ontario, right?
Yeah, exactly. Chernobyl, Ontario. But yeah, and it's funny. I think I'm getting used to it, as I'm sure people are too. But you can, and I imagine this is part of the reason why you're in Maine. Like you can feel as time goes on, like this idea of isolation was something that people, were like kind of could commit to kind of theoretically, and could participate and talk to their friends on Zoom, and fine, only buy your groceries once a week. And then but the kind of second wave of like the realization of how long this is going to take and how actually quite diminishing this is to your life. Like, it's great that we're having this conversation. Wouldn't it be? It would be. Imagine how isolating this would be without Zoom and FaceTime and all that kind of stuff. But we're all beginning to realize that there is no substitute for the kind of contact that people like to have. And there's no substitute for me for doing anything that's going to substitute for playing shows with the New Deal. Like, it just doesn't. There's no way around it. And I was beginning to feel in the city, I was getting especially with this weather too, that's probably like in Philly, it's like kind of gray and just that end of winter, beginning of spring that doesn't feel good to anybody. It was the most oppressive place I could be, is sitting in my house, looking out the window and seeing nobody out there.
Yeah.
So, and it's there's nobody out here, but that's right for this place. It's wrong for the city that I'm in. And so here I can walk around. I don't have to wash my hands every 20 seconds and, almost close my eyes and wait for it to be over.
Yeah, no, that's a great point, man. It when you are sort of actually in the middle of nowhere, it seems more appropriate and less depressing, because you're not dealing with something that is what it should not be, which is essentially I'm in the city and I can't do anything in this, because it's almost like, well, what the hell's the point? Like, why would you live on top of people unless there were some trade-off? So it's like, you can go to a nice farm or a nice ocean view or whatever, and all of a sudden it feels very right. Especially maybe, I don't know if you're if you're like this at all, but I'm definitely one of those people where like the off the beaten path stuff always feels very good to me. It feels very I don't know, like primordial or something. There's just something about that sort of middle of nowhere feeling that just, and I'm not saying I could do it for my whole life, but
never.
But it feels good.
I drive back once a week, and I go for 1 day a week back to my house, and then I can't wait to get the fuck out of there, come back here. And I really like my house is awesome. It's a great spot, but its intention is to have, like I was saying to my friend the other day or 2 days ago, I was driving up here and I was going to a grocery store, and I was like having to remind myself that the quantities of food that I buy are like very different from how I used to shop before for food, because I just assumed that in a week I'd probably have 4 people over for dinner twice in that week, or even 8 or something like that. My house is like that kind of place. And so the practice of I feel much more lonely in my house in a city than I do up here. And this place actually, I've been saying also to my friends, it's like I didn't realize how welcome the idea of spending time like with myself, alone by myself. I've never welcomed it so much in my life. And I think it's because there is no imperative to be participating in the juggernaut of, regular adult, active, practical, productive life. Like, we all got a pass from that right now. Not all. I mean, there are people who are working their asses off to keep us in this state of mind or in this situation. But the simple pleasure that I get for going for a walk for an hour and a half in a forest that I've like sat beside for 30 years but have never gone into is actually surprisingly welcome. I would have never given myself I would have never felt entitled to it. I'd feel like I was wasting time if I were doing that anywhere between a Monday and a Friday,
Right.
And it's an interesting, the kind of introspective period that this is creating for a lot of people, I think is pretty, in some cases, I think it's probably terrifying, and people are doing everything they can to avoid it. And then I guess if it's the right time in your life that you can welcome that, then there's at least that to be gained from this strange time. And not, and it feels the opposite of lonely. It's solitude.
It's a good point too, because I do think that there are some people that totally like, I don't want to say they get off on an experience like this, because clearly it's a negative thing, from the top. You know what I mean? Like this, we shouldn't have to do this. But I definitely think that there are some people that can kind of relish this idea of like, first of all, introversion. Those people are like, they hit the jackpot right now.
Yeah.
And
totally.
People who kind of like to isolate and everything. But I do for sure think that there are a lot of people that, like, to your point, you said, like some people are sort of alone with their thoughts. And I think that's a very terrifying thing for a lot of people, because I think some people need to, those distractions are sort of the things that prevent them from going down that icy road of like looking inward, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, it is. Sorry, I'm just sending a quick note.
No worries.
It's getting slow. But yeah, I have talked about that. I mean, I think I'm sure everybody has gone through either most or a substantial number of time, a part of their life, I think, needing to be distracted from needing distraction. I have definitely been one of those people. And I think that if I weren't, if this just hit, like if this happened 5 or 6 years ago, it would have been pretty daunting to spend this amount of time, like, from one day to the next, decelerating from being hyper productive and hyper busy and hyper whatever to nothing. And so I'm actually I have a lot of compassion for people who are experiencing that now, which is, it doesn't say that you're a bad person or, you don't have any self-awareness or anything like that, but it's just, it can be very rude, the demand to spend time with yourself if you don't want to. But again, there's 3 things that I really I look forward to doing and will never take for granted again after all of this. One of them is I really want to see my dad, who lives in Brazil and is 79 years old, and we had a trip planned together in June, which we of course won't be able to do. And I was thinking, like, even if I had the money, like, could I spend $150,000 to charter a private jet to fly down to Brazil to see my dad if he got sick and we're dying? And I think the answer is no. I don't even think I'd get in the door. The second is, of course, playing shows with the New Deal. They are like, I mean, I miss them more than anything, actually, of anything. And 3 is I really want to be able to go drink a beer in Barcelona, which is my favorite city outside of Toronto, or anywhere in the world, really. And these things are completely unattainable to me right now. They're just not possible.
Yeah.
But in the absent that, I'm quite grateful for this moment of crystallizing my awareness of the things that are really important to me. Like I'm guilty, like most people are, of not slowing down very often and recognizing the very unique, special, curated, cultivated, protected things that we have in our lives that in a way define us, but certainly give us like pleasure and purpose. And I think there's a great opportunity for all of us to at least be able to see a little more clearly, or very clearly, what those things are. And for me, it's very simple. And it was nice to have the opportunity to, or it's not nice, it's the wrong word. It's at least one silver lining in all of this is for me to be able to articulate what is important to me. And the list is actually pretty small, and it's nice. It's
totally.
like cool.
I said at the beginning of this how, and in a weird way, this has really kind of been a blessing for me in that, like, number one, I'm talking to Dan Kurtz, to be frank. I mean, that's pretty sweet in my book.
I'm flattered. Thank you.
Yeah, I knew you'd be like, what the hell am I going to say to that, dude? But,
I appreciate it. I do.
But it's like, I'm talking to, I spoke to one of the best photographers on earth a few days ago.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Who's
this
that?
guy, Colby Brown. who's like, you know, just it's just a Google him. You know what I mean? Like he's top whatever. You know. I'm speaking to like you know, some of the other guys I've talked to, like some of the best, you know, time lapsers in the world, because I'm really into doing like time lapses and that kind of photography. I've got this guy Peter Hurley coming up. He's like maybe one of the best, if not the best, headshot photographers in the world. Like these guys who are just outrageously successful and outrageously good at what they do. You know, it's awesome. Like a simple thing, like I just shoot them a DM on Instagram, you know, and I'm like, this is one of these, like, you know, I used to work in sales, and that was like, you know, your closing rate in sales is low, you know, just even if you're great, it's low.
Yeah.
And, you know, all of a sudden I'm in this environment where I'm just like shooting off these
batting 1,000
stupid DMs. And, you know, I'm just like, hey man, you know, always been a big fan of your work. You know, I started this podcast and blah, blah. And I tend to talk to more creative people and people that I admire or think are very good at their craft, etc. You know, just wondering if you'd want to do it. And I'm thinking like, you know, some of these guys have 1 million+ followers. And I'm like, I'm never going to get a response. And then it's like that night, they'll be like, yeah, sure, man. Why not? And I'm like,
yeah.
What?
Really? Yeah. Do I need to go through your agent? Do you have like, yeah. Well, that's awesome. Yeah. Again, these are, I think, looping back to the first thing you said, I think I know it's not consistent with everybody who does extraordinary things. Some people are real assholes about how great they are. Like Sting apparently is an asshole. Everybody says he's an asshole. And
that's a bummer.
Or people who just like stood in an elevator with him and tried to acknowledge him or whatever, you know, and he's like, fuck off, don't talk to me. I'm Sting. I know that you know that I am. And I'm like, leave me alone, you know? But I think for the vast majority of people, particularly creative people, is that the validation of what they do is expressed in people recognizing it. And like, it doesn't mean that absent you recognizing Colby Brown as an amazing photographer, every single person in the world recognizing it, without that happening, that he wouldn't still take amazing pictures. He's had to believe that he's got to love it, and he's had to believe that he's great at it, and has had to overcome this feeling that I think most, at least every, you know, creative person I know, which is like, I feel like I'm an imposter the whole time. Like I feel like I'm bullshitting myself and everybody else that I'm a bass player or whatever, you know. And it takes the mirror of people acknowledging what you do, particularly as being meaningful to them, that to fill in those gaps of confidence or belief or faith or whatever in what you do. And most of the time, I think people are grateful for it. But it, you know, these guys probably had 80-hour weeks until this all happened, and they wouldn't have had time to look at your DM. And it's not that they don't care. It's just like, I don't have the bandwidth for this right now. I'm being amazing, you know?
Yeah. Right.
Now
and
then, I can just talk about it.
Then coronavirus came in and said, not so fast.
Yeah.
Can't be amazing for a little while.
Anything you want. You can photograph that. Yeah. Do a headshot of that, you know, 6-pack of toilet paper you managed to buy, and you know, feel pretty good about it. That's the only portraiture you'll be doing for a while. Right.
Yeah. It took was the world to basically, you know, run out of toilet paper for me to be able to have these, like, you know, riveting conversations with people that I love, you know.
Exactly. Well, maybe I'll leave you with this, which is I always go away somewhere warm in the days leading up to my birthday. I've been doing it for the last couple of years, and so I went to Mexico. And my birthday's the 16th of March, and so and the 16th of March was already like everything was getting shut down, and I flew back on the 14th, and I was talking to my friends, including the guys in the New Deal, because we were talking about how we were going to maybe have to cancel these shows, and then we started talking about doing a live stream, which turned out to have to, whatever. Anyway, but the overwhelming message was, there's no fucking toilet paper here in Toronto. And so I repacked my suitcase, and instead of bringing back tequila and moles and fucking chipotle peppers and all this other stuff that I like bringing back from Mexico, I brought back toilet paper. I brought back 22 rolls of toilet paper in my suitcase from Mexico that smells like, they've got like a kind of an almond powder flavor smell to it that, you know, like, yeah, a feature. Anyway, that was the beginning of the end, in terms of the beginning of the end of the world as I knew it. And I just, you know, I think about it, that was 33 days ago. That was, at 33 days ago, I was on a beach in Mexico being like, this will be over. This is
what's all this stupid hysteria? Yeah.
Yeah. And in fact, I thought, and I'm not actually sure. I mean, you know, at the time I seriously considered staying in Mexico, and thinking, and the only reason I didn't come back was because I had a birthday party planned, which got canceled. And I had 3 New Deal shows to play that week. And I was like, fuck it, I'll stay here and, you know, play it out for another week or two. I don't know if at this point I would have still stayed, but, you know, I do have friends, like I've got family who live in Brazil. I've got friends who are living in Mexico, and, you know, their little social media posts that they put up about themselves in isolation, swimming in a, you know, aquamarine ocean and enjoying 33 degrees Celsius.
I gotcha. Yeah. That's got to be like 90 something, I'm assuming.
Yeah. Real hot. It makes me wonder whether I made the right decision coming back here or not. But anyway, we'll see.
That's fair.
Yeah. I wonder about
that. How are you doing on time? Do you have to get going pretty soon?
Oh my God. Is it really 5:45?
It's 5:45.
We've been talking for 2 hours. I have to
almost.
go. I have to go because at 6 o'clock I have to Zoom call Jamie for his birthday, and I thought I'd take a shower for it and maybe brush my hair, and so that I can look like, you know, gotta look nice. Kind of people who I got to meet everybody else who's going to be, you know, joining on the Zoom call.
Right. Well, is it okay?
I've got 14 minutes.
Is it? There was one other thing that I wanted to ask you about, and just, you know, tell me if you think it's like a sore subject, but I've always been super curious about it. But like, just the whole like Darren departure, you know, the whole thing, you know, I always felt like as a fan, that was such an intriguing thing for me, because I always felt like, you know, as far as you guys kind of feeding off each other and everything, I thought he was such a big part of that, you know, and you know, the story was so odd. You know what I mean? And I never felt like, it was almost like, you know, I felt like the New Deal came out and were like, hey, you know, Darren is going off and doing his Scientology church. But and so it was not like there was no sort of lie about it or anything, but I always felt like there was this lack of like, holy shit, like what a crazy thing, you know? And I think there's probably a lot of other people out there that felt that way. Like, what a bizarre circumstance. So I don't know. I was just wondering kind of what you like thought about the whole thing.
Well, Darren's participation in Scientology was already, man, I don't know, what year was that? Was that 2013, 2012, something like that? Was already like 10 years strong at that point. And I think I would imagine that there would have come a time where like, if the New Deal had been playing, like, so in that time, for example, I had moved to England, was playing Dragonette, and had made it difficult for the New Deal to, you know, be playing as often as it might otherwise have done. Jamie also had 2 little kids during that time, and that, you know, he wasn't able to be out as much. And I think Darren kind of felt like he was spinning his wheels a bit, in terms of, you know, where I think he would have liked to have seen a New Deal go. But I don't think that I think that even if the New Deal were playing 150 or 200 shows a year, that it would have ultimately, another thing would have happened, which is like the scene in which the New Deal plays is antithetical in many ways to a lot of the spirit behind Scientology. It's pretty heavy into drugs and heavy into partying and not clean living and whatever. And I don't really think that in the long run, Darren would have been able to square that with the increasing weight that Scientology had kind of spiritually for him. And so I think, so the rationale might have been, well, the New Deal's not really playing very much, and Dan's not doing, like, Dan's living in England and Jamie's got kids and whatever, and so I'm going to go and do the Scientology thing. I think it would have been that way anyway, and I think Darren is very happy doing what he's doing. He's actually, I just emailed with him last week. He sent me a video that he'd asked me to put up on the New Deal channels, which was like a Scientology produced music video using, like, with Scientologists writing a song and making a video over Zoom with, a positive message for how to stay healthy. And
no kidding.
COVID, again, a very benign, socially oriented, for the benefit of humanity kind of message. And it's part of what Darren has been doing, which is he's been editing and producing a lot of content for Scientology, which we don't see because I think it's probably mostly internal stuff, but it's,
right.
It's all visual, video editing and that. And so it's funny because I know how remarkable Darren is as a player, and I know, and Darren, in fact, is the guy who allowed me and Jamie to bring our kind of imperfect, or let's say journeyman approach to dance music up against the guy who, like, literally could play like the drum machines or like that music, the way the drums were programmed in house music and drum and bass and all this other stuff. And and I think the challenge was, and I'm not trying to be diplomatic, but I'm also, there's just things that I feel are like internal to us
that's cool, man. I mean,
but I think it warrants, like, there are two drummers who I respect, Davide and Darren are the two drummers that I think are the best drummers I've ever played with and ever will play with, and don't need to play with any other ones.
Cool.
And I think in, like, for example, when Joel was playing with TND, Joel wasn't enough of one thing to replace what was missing in the absence of Darren. Davide, whatever Davide does whatever Darren does that Davide doesn't do, whether it's beatbox or didgeridoo or just play house music the way that Darren plays it, Davide brings just as much on, like, in his own version of being a fucking amazing drummer. So I'm intensely grateful to Darren for having created the New Deal with us and pushed like the motherfucker that he was, and like promoting it and never like losing energy and pushing through. And I'm sure that he really misses it. But I think that it was the only thing that, the New Deal was the last thing in his life that was not consistent with the way of living, like the Scientologist that he wants to be.
Yeah.
And that must have been a hard decision for him, I think. And we, and it came on the tail end of, I think there was definitely some tension that was created in our band by Darren's, by the elephant in the room, which was that Darren was becoming a pretty zealous Scientologist. And,
right.
And necessarily that had to come with the judgment of us not being Scientologists and not living the way like Scientologists should. And I think I'm sure ours is not the only scenario where when somebody becomes pretty, not extremist, but zealous about a religion in particularly, or something they call religion, that it can break people apart.
Yeah.
We were not the same as we were when we all started out. And good on him for managing to like have that degree of certainty and in his belief that he was going to be that to his detriment in other ways, which is it kind of alienated him from everybody around in our band, and put him on a path where he had to lead this thing that he was kind of born to be, which is the drummer in the New Deal.
Yeah. That's well said, man. Do you guys still like talk? You said he sent you an email, but I mean, do you keep in touch, or is it just sort of the
Yeah,
too far away?
occasionally I've heard more from him recently, and yeah, and in ways I miss him. I miss the guy too. I mean, Darren's a strange dude. I mean, most are, but his strange is there's a challenge at sometimes. But despite all of that, I think now, the same thing could probably be said for like failed, romantic relationships or friendships that you've had with people. That if you'd had the maturity that you have now to manage the situation that you had back then, you could have had a very different outcome. And,
Totally.
And I think that might have been the case also with us. But I mean, but I think Darren found Scientology because he needed it.
Yeah.
And so that's what he's doing.
Yeah. Well, dude, I have to say, this is coming from not just myself, but a bunch of other people as well that saw you in the Philly show and saw you guys in some other shows. You seem happier on stage than I've ever seen you, including back in even the early 2000s. Like you guys seem like you're just really happy. You seem like you're very happy to be doing what you're doing.
Yeah, it's I've noticed that too. It's funny actually. The most regular comment that I get from people, like I come off stage and meet some people who've been at the show. They don't say like, man, that was a fucking amazing show, or that thing that you did at that time, or whatever, or this version of the song. They like, I can't believe how much fun it looks like you guys are having up there.
Yeah.
And it's funny that it's the most notable thing about like everything that's happening up there. It's like our smiles are the loudest thing. And
right.
I mean, I'm smiling just thinking about it. It's wonderful.
Yeah.
It's like one of the greatest things that's ever happened to me is playing now in the New Deal.
Well, dude, I mean, people have been watching you for 20 years. So they know, like, maybe back in the early 2000s, you guys might have been at your most ambitious or something, like we're on to something here and like serious face, but yeah, now it's very clear that you're just like having a ball up there. And it was very noticeable to myself and other people around me that hadn't seen you in a while.
It's great because it corroborates the suspicion that I have that I look like I'm having a great time the whole time. But I also think it's the most, in a way, it's like the most important part of like the experience for you guys watching it, right? And it like, I don't know. I think it's as I said, it's the loudest thing in the room, and I think like like laughter is contagious. I don't know if you saw a little while ago, we posted something. Jamie and I were filming these little promos for shows where we were going to just do something on FaceTime, and Jamie popped up as like a unicorn, and I did an emoji of myself. And when he came up as a unicorn,
I saw that, yeah.
I started laughing so hard, like I couldn't stop laughing. And I happened to just see that I was clearing up my hard drive. And I was like, oh, what's this video? And it was the video of me laughing. And I began to laugh as hard as I was laughing at the time. And the point being that laughter is infectious. And I think so is like, in this case, our experience of having such a good time and smiling our way through it, it's the takeaway more than the music. But without it, I don't think the music would connect as much.
Yeah.
It's great that we're having a great time. We're fucking grateful to be there. And we're so lucky 20 years later that people are coming to see us make shit up on the spot.
Yeah. That's for sure, man. Dude, I used to like fantasize about, well, if for some reason, Dan ever leaves the New Deal, it was like every time I practice, I was just auditioning to be, Dan, which to be honest with you, like that sounds super lame. I 100% understand that, but it was like,
well, I'll tell Jamie and Davide in case, I can't make it to a gig.
Yeah. If you get stuck on the farm for the next couple of years, get me a tryout or something.
Yeah. Lose my finger in a scything accident or something.
Right. You'd come up with a way. You play with your pinky. Yeah.
Right. Well, this was awesome. I didn't think we'd have a 2-hour conversation, but it's great. Thank you for absorbing 2 hours of my COVID era.
Dude, thank you for giving me 2 hours of your COVID era. I sincerely appreciate it, man. Again, I mean, this is one of those weird full circle, like Dan fucking Kurtz. Huh. Yeah, it really, I mean, it truly, truly is one of those things for me. So
amazing.
Well,
Well,
so
maybe
thank
we'll
you
have
so
to do
much,
a
man.
recap. We'll do one in person maybe when we're allowed to be in the same room.
That'd
Once
be
Canadians
awesome.
are allowed back over the border and we can reapply for our visa and
Right.
play a venue.
Right. That'd be
My beard
awesome.
might be white by then. And it was great to meet you here.
You too, man. And tell Jamie I
Good
said
luck with all
happy
the others.
birthday.
I will. I'll tell him right now. Right on.
Okay.
Cool. Thanks,
Perfect.
Adam. I'll see you again. Okay.
All right, man.
Talk to you
Take
later.
it easy.
Ciao.